Hello knitters, Barbara Benson here. I'm an independent knitwear designer who also likes to make videos here on my YouTube channel, Watch Barbara Knit. Make sure to check in the description notes below the video where you will find links to all of my online shenanigans, including how to get my patterns to knit up for yourself, how to join the Watch Barbara Knit Facebook group, how to support me on Patreon, and where to get Watch Barbara Knit merchandise. Today we are going to talk about stitch definition. Why? Why are we going to talk about stitch definition, you might ask? Well, I was writing up the romance language, like the descriptive paragraph on the first page of a new pattern, and I mentioned that this pattern works particularly well with yarn with good stitch definition. And I realized my brain was like, wait a minute, this might be one of those things that I take for granted, but that a newer novice knitter might not really know what that means. They might be like, okay, that's nice. You told me to look for something with good stitch definition, but what does stitch definition mean? And I like to make videos about things like that because I think there's a lot of if you know kind of stuff in knitting that doesn't get effectively explained, and you really can't explain it in depth in a pattern because it would just take up way too much space because a pattern, and there's a video, I'll put a link in the description notes below, that's is this a pattern or is this a tutorial? In a pattern, you don't go into that much detail. There's a certain level of assumption, but here's the video to talk about stitch definition. What is stitch definition and how it affects your yarn choices and how they interact with patterns. So stitch definition is how well is your stitch defined when you see it knit up in a field of knitting. And I have a whole pile of knitwear down here. It's on a little bin that I'm going to show you, and I'm deliberately doing this in this style of camera as opposed to showing you close up like with a top down look, because I want you to be able to see it both close up and from a distance, because that is one of the things that stitch definition is really about. It's when you look at the fabric, how distinct is each individual stitch, and that is different based on close-up or at a distance. So the thing that I grabbed that has literally the highest stitch definition in my stash of stuff is this right here. And if I hold this up here, I'm gonna guess, I can't see because my monitor, my picture of myself that I can see when I'm making these videos is about this big. And there's a reason for that. If it was big, you would find me, I'd talk to myself in the monitor and then my eyes would be in the wrong place. Just a little YouTube thing. So I keep it really small so I can make sure that the video is still working, but that I'm not distracted by me, because I distract myself. But so here we go. This you should be able to see from a distance, because I'm back here, each individual stitch in this stitch pattern. You can see it. It's forms a texture. Now, if I pull it up more closely, you can really see it. But the difference between seeing it here and seeing it here, and it's seeing each of those individual stitches and how crisp they are and how much they play a part in the fabric. It's never, with this kind of stitch definition, gonna look like a smooth thing of fabric. It's always gonna have a visual bumpiness to it. And so that is really high stitch definition. Another one I have here that is actually, you know what, let's go. So this is zero stitch definition. No stitch definition at all. You can't see a single stitch. This is a novelty yarn, which we had that video. This is a faux fur yarn. You could not look at this and tell me if it's garter or stockinette. It is stockinette, by the way. But look there's no stitch definition. You cannot. It doesn't matter how close I show this to you. I'm going to get my head out of the way for hopes that it can focus. you're never going to see stitches. This is 0 stitch definition. So those are the two like extremes of stitch definition. 0 stitch definition, super, 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 super high stitch definition of what I have. And we'll talk about why this has such high stitch definition in a minute, because stitch definition is like created by a combination of the fiber content of the yarn and the structure of the yarn. Like, how is it spun? How is it plied? The yarn structure and the yarn content is going to have a really huge influence on its stitch definition. When you're looking for high stitch definition, structure-wise, something that is more tightly plied, something that is like spun tightly, is going to have most of the time a higher stitch definition. More plies, if it has more than one ply, the more plies it has, the more it tends to have a higher stitch definition. And multiple plies spun tightly together is going to give you high stitch, a nice round yarn. When you're looking at the yarn in the skein, it's gonna look almost like rope. It's going to have a really roundness. And if you pull on it, if it squishes down, it springs right. It's hard to squish down. And if it squishes down, it springs right back. But a yarn that doesn't really like collapse when you pull on it typically is going to have good stitch definition. Again, nice round, sometimes it's called bouncy yarn, but a nice round yarn, if you're looking at a cross section of it, is going to have good stitch definition. And on the other end, the more loosely plied something is, the more loosely spun something is. It's going to, and the fewer plies that it has, it's going to have less stitch definition, because when you knit with it, it's going to tend to compact and it's going to tend to bloom when you block it. So it's going to get kind of fuzzy when you block it, and having those soft edges on the yarn is going to present more of a field of oneness. You're not going to see the stitches as well, which means it has less stitch definition. But also fiber comes into play. Your plant fibers, because they don't bloom, because they don't get fluffy like that, plant fibers as a whole, in general, tend to have better stitch definition than an animal fiber does. Like alpaca. Alpaca is very drapey, and it's fuzzy. It's inherently fuzzy. So it's going to, as a whole, have less stitch definition. It's going to blur those edges. Now, could you get a high definition alpaca yarn if you blend it with some other things and have multiple plies and do it really tight? Then yes, you could get some stitch definition out of that, but in general, not going to have a lot of stitch definition. And the piece I have, mohair. Mohair is one of those fuzzy things. And so I wanted to show you this. So this is a single ply silk wool blend held with mohair. And if I hold it back here, it just, as you can see, looks like a field of fabric. Okay, there's stripes in here. There's color work in here. You can really see the stripes here, but that's only because I'm switching between the two yarns. On this side, it really all just blends into an overall fabric. Now, if I bring it up really close, you can start to see the stitches. But if I back it off, it really just blends. And that's what I mean about softening the edges. It blends into one fabric. This has a little bit of silk in it, and silk is one of those, it's not technically a plant fiber, it's an insect fiber, but it has some of the same behaviors as plant fiber. So it is something that can lend a lot of stitch definition, but because of what it's blended with here, that kind of went away. This is the piece that I have. This is a fingering weight, and you can see here, this is a silk wool blend. And this, you can see the stitches fairly well in that. It has good stitch definition, so you can see the movement of the lace, and the little wiggly bit in the middle pops really well, as you can see there. So one of the reasons I chose a silk blend and paired the silk blend with this particular pattern is because I wanted this motif to like really pop, and the silk also helped with the blocking to keep the lace open. If this was in a yarn that has less stitch definition, something softer, something with alpaca in it, something loosely spun, or a single ply or something like that, this ridge that's running up the middle is not going to pop out as much. It's not going to be as distinct. Now, is that a bad thing? No, it will still look pretty, but it's just why, if you made a yarn substitution and chose to go a different direction, you might be like saying, why doesn't my lace look as like really crisp as the picture? And it could be because of your yarn choice. So the other, and the first one I showed you, cotton. Cotton tends to have really good stitch definition because it doesn't bloom. And again, cotton, especially the kind of cottons that you're going to want for like a market bag like this, are going to be a really strong yarn. And the way you get strength is by tightly plying multiple plies together. So you're going to get a really high stitch definition yarn, which causes problem with mosaic and color work, with color work in general. Because when you're doing color work, you're relying on presenting a unified field that gives you this illusion that you're drawing, painting pictures, right? And when you can see each individual stitch, it kind of interferes with that illusion. So that's why with this particular pattern, I had to go with a really, really big, bold motif so that it was still visible through the stitch definition. Because if this was a much smaller motif, then this high stitch definition yarn would really make it so you couldn't really see the pattern. It would just be like textured, visual texture. An example, because you guys are always asking me for examples, I'm going to show you these, talking about that softening, how the color work and using a lower stitch definition yarn helps with color work. So this is my TIE Fighter mitt, right? And you can see if I bring it up close, please focus, there. You see the little TIE Fighters, aren't they cute? And you can see, in general, it's fingering weight. You can see those little stitches, but they're not really crisp. They're just kind of a texture that's there. And when I pull it back here, they pretty much disappears. I mean, there's a little texture left from the stitches, but not much. And it lets you see this little motif. Again, if you used a high stitch definition yarn here with these little tiny motifs, it's not going to pop as well because the stitches are going to interfere. And then here's another fingerless mitt. This one is cashmere. Okay, this one is, I think, a wool silk blend. I can't really remember. It's definitely wool. This one is 100% cashmere. And that has a very, very soft ply, and it's very softly done. And you can see, because of the fuzz, it really creates this overall visual where you really can't. If I pull up close, you can start to see the stitches. Do I need to hide it so you guys there? But as I pull it back, it just kind of disappears. The stitches disappear, and you just get this overall field that gives you that herringbone effect. So that's what I meant by the picking your stitch definition, paying attention to stitch definition when you are selecting for color work is important. Now, what what is something with really high stitch definition good for? Something with really high stitch definition is great for cables, okay? Because cables, you want it to pop. You want that roundness. You want it to stand up, and you don't want it to fade into that background. So high stitch definition and cables is really, really great. Now, that's not saying you can't do cables in other yarns if you want a different effect, because there are all kinds of great kind of fuzzy yarns and everything, and you can do neat things with cables. I don't have any real examples to show you because I don't design much with cables. It's that I should. I've been playing with them, but cables are not really, they're on my list of things to do. But I don't have any cable samples to show you. But cables pop. As I showed you, that crisp lace that I wanted that had that wiggly motif, that is a great thing for stitch definition. If you're doing a heavily textured piece that you want that texture to really, really shine, something with high stitch definition is going to make that really, really pop. And the piece coming out that that's going to come out, I think, next week. Hopefully I'll get it out next week. It has a texture to it that looks really good in the stitch definition. So if you want to see those stitches, if you're putting effort into texture or cables or things like that, that's where you want the good stitch definition. And something that has silk in it. It's good to have, 100% silk can do stuff, but it tends to draw up flat. I am a really big fan of blends of yarns that when you bring different fibers that do different things. I'm going to see what other, other things that can obscure stitch definition. Variegation. This is a single ply yarn, so it doesn't have the greatest stitch definition to start with, which, it's still a beautiful yarn. You just got to use it you got to use the right materials for the right thing. But once you add in the variegation, like this stitches almost, it's again, just a field. I can bring it up close and show you what's happening, and you can start to see the stitches and you can see the lace, but it's just in general a texture field with the lace on it. So being aware that even if you put, this one doesn't have good stitch definition, but even if you pick a yarn that you think has good stitch definition, but if it has a lot going on, like in variegation and stuff, that can still cause some issues. This is pretty much a yarn that has like right in the middle of stitch definition. Okay, this is Malabrigo Rios, and it's a nice yarn. It's not super tightly plied, but it's also not loosely plied. It's like right in the middle, and you can see you've got these ridges, and the ridges are visible, and you've got a little bit of variegation, so it works. This particular pattern in something that had higher stitch definition, these ridges would pop more. This particular pattern in something with lower stitch definition, you would barely see these ridges at all. They would kind of fade into the background. But this has, so I'm going to hold up close so you can see how much you can see those individual stitches. And as I pull it back, they're probably still a little bit visible. So it's like medium, so stitch definition is a whole like range. Like it's not like it is or isn't stitch except for the fuzzy. This is zero stitch definition. That is an isn't no stitch definition. This is a low stitch definition yarn, and you can see there, if I hold it up close, there is a texture knit into it. But if I pull it back like this, you're not going to see it very much. Again, if you used a higher stitch definition yarn, that texture is going to be a lot poppier. So it just depends on, do you want to emphasize the texture, or do you want it to just look more like an overall field of color? So it depends on what you want. So that is my apparently 20-minute rant on stitch definition. I may or may not have hit all the salient points. I hope that what you take away from it is to pay attention to stitch definition when you are selecting yarns for your projects. Now, if you see a pattern that says this needs good stitch definition or this needs low stitch definition, that you have a better idea. You need to look at the structure of the yarn, which is it multi-ply, tightly plied? When you play with it or look at it in the skein, are the strands really, really visible? And when you pull on them, do they kind of boing back? Or is it fuzzy? Is it hard to see the individual strands? In the skein, you can even start to tell stitch definition. So you look at the yarn structure, but then you also look at the fiber content. Because that can heavily affect. But you can get good stitch definition by taking a fiber that typically has lower stitch definition and giving it the right structure, and vice versa. So again, it's one of those things that there's a lot more going on than meets the eye at the surface. If you start digging into it, it can get more and more complicated. But if all else fails, go into your local yarn store and ask the lovely person there to help you and say, I'm looking for a yarn with good stitch definition, or I'm looking for a yarn with low stitch definition. And hopefully your local yarn store owner can, or employee, or whomever it is, can help guide you in the right direction, because they're going to know their stock the best. And as always, if I just kind of went off the tracks and started going one way and didn't finish a sentence, because I do that, ask me questions in the comments. I will do my best to answer. If you have specific questions or general questions about stitch definition, please let me know and we can continue this conversation. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, click that like button. And if you would like to be notified whenever I upload a new video, please subscribe to my channel and select notifications. Thank you so much.